David, always good to have you in studio.
And it's always good to be here.
How about those hearings yesterday? I think the most heated we've seen, really.
Well, they were the most heated thus far. This is the third time that Eric Holder, the Attorney General, has been up before the Congress to try to explain just what happened and who was responsible for the Fast and Furious gun-walking operation. And, of course, each time he's had to essentially retract everything he said in the previous hearing. This time they've retracted the letter, and now he's down to either accusing those who are asking legitimate questions of being too partisan, of suggesting that they're paranoid and too interested in conspiracies, and too interested in trying to define lies as lies when all they are is really misstatements of fact. And interestingly, when he denied the various things, he was asked at yesterday's hearing, okay, who started it?
Yeah.
Who did it? You're the Attorney General, you've been investigating this thing, and he said, well, we don't know.
Yeah.
Now, here's a major government operation that from the very outset has been, it's been clear that it was not a local rogue agent nor a local rogue office of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It's an operation that from the beginning it was clear had to have been approved relatively high up because it involved millions and millions of dollars in taxpayers' funds and hundreds of agents. It involved not just the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It involved the FBI. It involved the Department of Homeland Security. And since it's been publicly unmasked, the Attorney General and everyone else start by pointing fingers at local guys and then promoting them to shut them up and suggesting that they have no idea who did it, who's responsible, who authorized the spending of the money, or what. The President of the United States has said it's a big government, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah,
now that might be true, but the fact of the matter is that from the beginning, the real question that people have asked themselves is not just who, but why. And why has always been the question. What's the motive? Why would they do this? They claim, of course, that they were walking these guns so that they could follow them, but they had no capacity to follow them. And as a consequence, they went to Mexico. They've been involved in hundreds of Mexican deaths and the death of a federal agent in this country, and they said that they would show up at crime scenes. Now, of what value was that? The value of that was that from the beginning, it now appears, they were planning to use the fact that guns purchased from U.S. dealers were showing up at crime scenes here and in Mexico as the rationale for imposing stricter gun control in this country and going after those dealers. In other words, they created a problem that resulted in death, created the problem by breaking our own laws and forcing gun dealers to break our laws, and then said, look, the laws are being broken and guns are showing up in Mexico. We need a law to prevent people from selling these guns and using them. And even in yesterday's hearing, after all of this has been demonstrated, Eric Holder had the nerve to stand there, or sit there, I should say, look at the senators and say, look, what we really need is stronger laws.
Yeah, and I thought it was great because ISA really took him to task over these memos that show the ATF talked about using this crisis to help them advance their own agenda. And I thought, along with what you were bringing up, he looks right at him and says, hey, you're holding this whole thing, these memos in context. And then he admits he never even read the memos. Typical, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, he at least claims he didn't read the memos. Now,
these
memos were part of a huge package of data and memos and papers that were turned over late last Friday, which is a typical political way of trying to keep them out of the news. I think we have to give some credit in this instance to CBS, which initially broke the Fast and Furious story. And over the weekend and before this hearing, they went through all the emails and all the memos, and they found buried in there the emails suggesting that the Fast and Furious operation could be used to justify the registration of long gun sales to among some 8,500 federal firearms license holders. And you know, when you look at why, I always like, I like to read Sherlock Holmes stories, and you know, he said in effect at one point that when you eliminate all the possible reasons for something, all of the scenarios, and there's one left, no matter how foolish or how absurd it may seem, that's the answer. And what's happened here is over time, from the time this broke, all the other explanations have been proven false. There is only one explanation for this. This was not a rogue agency, not a rogue agent. This was a rogue government creating a crisis that they could then try to solve by going after the American people's Second Amendment rights. Think about it. If the Border Patrol agent, Brian Terry, had not been killed, and had that not inspired some decent agents within the Bureau to go public, to become whistleblowers, we would be in a situation now where this administration would be holding press conferences saying American guns sold by American gun dealers are showing up at crime scenes all over Mexico and in the United States, and that means we need more laws. That's where we'd be today. We're not there only because a couple of honest, decent career agents said this is an outrage and went public.
Yep, and Holder, though, still sits there. And he says, you know, I'm not to blame. I'm not going to resign. I don't think anybody in my department has resigned. We haven't lied. And then he sits there and he says, but you know, I'll tell you one thing. I know we're going to pay the price for this for years to come, that people are going to be harmed on both sides of the border.
That doesn't seem to bother him
It
too
doesn't.
much.
He's so nonchalant. It's just so matter of fact for him. Well, you know, hey, I'm sorry it happened, but that's the way it's going to be.
This investigation is something that he and his boss are going to have to pay the price for, because it's not going to stop. The fact of the matter is that he's lied to Congress. There are now 50-some members of the House who've asked for his resignation. Interestingly, the Democrats who have been naturally defending a Democratic appointee began this hearing again saying what we really should be talking about is the need for more gun control laws. Then yesterday, I don't know if you saw it, but the reporter for the Daily Caller asked some Democratic congressmen what they thought, and they denied ever having heard of Fast and Furious. They didn't know what it was.
Oh my.
They said that they...
So they're taking the Holder lines. I didn't know, and I don't know when I knew.
I don't want to know. It was somebody else. And of course, when they get cornered, in this instance on a Second Amendment question, but when this administration gets cornered on anything, they say, Bush did it. It was really us. Eric Holder said, how can you question me? I'm the man who stopped this from happening. He's also the man who started it happening. It's a little bit like a fellow who's robbed a bank saying to the police, but I stopped. You know, you should give me some credit for not doing it anymore.
Right, and they brought up wide receiver again. And even Holder had to point out.
In the last hearing, he tried to insinuate that the Bush program, which was very different, it was not a gun walking program, except in the sense that they walked outside the gun dealers and were trailed and followed by agents who then arrested the people when they were transferring the guns. They didn't just let them walk. After trying to imply that this was the genesis of what happened, at the second hearing, he was asked directly, are you equating that with Fast and Furious? And he said, well, no, of course not. But politically, he's trying to.
Yeah.
If we make a mistake, it's George Bush's fault. He can't defend himself anymore.
You know, and the Democrats continue to run defense for these guys. And they brought up everything yesterday. They brought up gun shows. They brought up the National Carry Right to Reciprocity Act. I mean, they went through their laundry list. And when push comes to shove, you know, and they also claimed about these conspiracy theories. They don't have anything to go on.
You know, they think
As
we're
you were saying
paranoid.
earlier,
As I said to
that.
a reporter earlier, it's even paranoids have enemies, and I may be paranoid, but the fact is that what we suspected was happening has now been proven to be happening, and that means it's not paranoid.
Yeah,
to worry
no,
about
and the
it.
evidence is there.
And as
Absolutely.
one of his questioners said yesterday, it's not a conspiracy. It's not just a theory. When there's evidence that it happened, it did happen. You guys did do it, and you're going to have to come to grips with it. Jim Sensenbrenner from Wisconsin said there is an easy way to deal with this and a hard way. And if you want to go the hard way, that's impeachment. And if that's what we have to do, that's what we'll do. This is not going to go away.
No.
It's not going to go away because too many laws were broken by federal officials and at the behest of federal officials. Right. And I think that, you know, in each of these appearances, the Attorney General has seemed closer to being like a bear up a tree who's been followed by a group of hounds. And he's up that tree now, and he doesn't know what to do. He's tried to blame it on everybody else. You know, at first it was just a few agents in Phoenix. Then it was the fellow in charge of the office in Phoenix. Then it was some low-level guy at BATF. Then it was somebody at the Justice Department. Now you had the head of the criminal division of the Justice Department saying it was me. It didn't go any higher than me. And then you've got Holder. And interestingly, at the hearing yesterday, one of the things that he was pressed on was the fact that in all of this stuff that was dumped, any emails to and from him weren't in there. And a number of the questioners said, "Why would that be? Why aren't your emails in there?" Now, this morning, Congressman Ice's office noted that yesterday they got another tranche of emails and things from the Justice Department. And it was unclear whether that was the Justice Department or whether somebody else has flipped. Because at this point, you've got a lot of people who are conceivably, government officials, who are conceivably facing criminal charges.
Yes.
And a lot of people who want out. And remember, the original, after the story broke and after the pressure started, the acting head of the BATF, against Holder's orders, went and met with Darrell Iss's staff and with Senator Grassley's staff because he knew, in fact, the President of the United States had basically laid it on him, and he was essentially saying, I'm not going down for this myself because I know others that ought to be involved. What you've got now is what you have when a cover-up and when a criminal conspiracy, which this is, begins to unravel. You've got the people down at the bottom saying, am I going to take the fall?
I ain't taking it.
Or am I going to go up to the next person? And the question then is, who's the next person and how high does that go? And it could go very high, and it's very serious. Think about it. Hundreds of people have been killed.
Yes.
U.S. laws have been violated, and all in an attempt, apparently, to simply further an anti-gun political agenda held by the President of the United States and members of his administration.
You know, and you have, I think you're so right, because I think Holder keeps digging a deeper hole, not only for himself, but for the administration. But it was interesting, John Pop and I were talking about this morning, you know, when he talked about, you know, I read every email that has been sent by Grassley and Isa.
But nothing that comes out of my own department.
But then he says, so they say, well, hey, those memos were attached to one of the, he says, oh, I never read attachments. I mean, he's starting to really fall apart at the seams. But I got to ask you, you look at what's going on, you look at how this has really become a partisan issue when it shouldn't be. But, you know, Wayne has said this is all the more reason why this next November is the most important election in our lifetime.
There's no question about that. Now, remember, we now have 50-some-odd members of Congress calling for the Attorney General's resignation. Wayne made that call back during the annual meeting that we had in Pittsburgh last spring, because it was clear to those of us who were following it that this was really smelly, really serious, and that it was the tip of the iceberg in an effort to undermine our Second Amendment rights. And the fact of the matter is that if you get out there, a lot of our people even are saying, not about Fast and Furious specifically, but about this administration, well, yeah, we don't like them, but the fact is they haven't really gone after us. Well, they've been going after a lot of other people, but they've always had as their agenda going after us. And if they have the opportunity to do that directly, they'll do it. If they can't do it directly, they're doing what they're doing now, which is to go after us indirectly and try to build a political case to go against us directly. The number of federal firearms license holders in this country has decreased significantly under the current administration because the president and his minions are harassing them and making it more difficult. And it's easy enough for a hunter or a competitive shooter or somebody who has a gun in their home for self-protection to say, well, that's the firearms dealers, you know, that's not me. Well, if you can't buy a gun, as people in the district have learned, if there isn't somebody that's licensed to sell that gun, then your rights are as meaningless as if they didn't exist. Because what's happened in the district, as you well know, is they've said, okay, Yes, you do have a right to have a gun in your home to protect yourself, but it has to be bought here, and good luck.
There ain't no gun stores.
You know, this is a thing, and this is a situation in which we do, in fact, confront an incredible crisis in terms of our rights. We've gained so much over the last few decades. We've won so much in the Congress, in the courts, and at the local level. We've stood up to every threat successfully. All of that can be wiped out if this president and his administration have 4 more years to do it, because then they won't have to worry about surrendering some of their political capital to go after us. They will just do it.
Yeah.
You remember, this is a president who told Sarah Brady of handgun control, don't worry, we're going to deliver, but right now we have to do it under the radar. After the election, they don't have to do it under the radar. They can come at us directly, and you can bet your bottom dollar that they will, in fact, do that. In the interim, they're making life as miserable as they can for as many of us as they can make it miserable for. And after the election, the Second Amendment will be at greater risk than it ever has been.
And like you said, make your voice heard. You got to get out there and speak, because every vote counts. And,
that's right.
and if
We-
you
you
don't
know-
think it does, you'll pay the price when you don't get out there.
The American people, and this goes for gun owners and hunters and everybody else, the American people are not obsessed with politics. Every gun owner in America was not tuned in to watch this hearing yesterday. Every gun owner and hunter in America has a life to live. They have kids to raise. They have a life to enjoy. But the American people, when their rights are threatened,
All of them.
come up, stand up, and do what they need to protect those rights and to protect their way of life. That's been the strength of the NRA, because gun owners and believers in the Second Amendment have been among the first to step forward when those threats occur. It is becoming very clear, and will become clearer in the months ahead, that this is a time when everything is at stake, and all of us are going to have to do what we can do between now and next November to make sure that our rights are, in fact, protected. We've done it before, and we can do it again, but we're all going to have to stand together to accomplish that.
All righty, David. Always good to have you.
It's always a
And
pleasure.
you're welcome anytime.